Thank you, Mr. Chair. Um, I want to thank everybody for your comments today. I think there's fleshing out that needs to continue here regarding tolling. I think we're all in agreement that the infrastructure is in dire straits, and I think there are competing ideas, so to speak, as to how we're going to fund those infrastructure costs. So I'm just going to make a few comments and maybe ask one or two questions. Uh, some of the things that irk me regarding the tolling bill is this not coming back to the legislature once this plan is assembled by the DOT. And I know we're going to have a public or an informational hearing, and then it'll be submitted to the federal government for the final approval. But the fact that we don't get to have a say, a hearing, for it to come back to us, I think is we're not serving our constituents the way that I believe we should be. They're holding us responsible, accountable, and for us not to have a say into the final product, I don't think we're serving them well in doing that. The inaccurate information that, we've got dueling, I guess, information. We've got the study of 2015, we got the 2018 study, and I'm going by memory here, but 2015, I think the cost per mile was 11 to 20 cents. And now we've got a new report that says, gee, we're going to have a discount at 4.4 cents a mile. I think we need final details. We need this lack of details, which includes it went from 82 gantries down to 53 gantries, cost per mile, the financing, the impact of what's the final impact when we look into the those that can't afford to drive or pay tolls. What's the impact should we include emergency vehicles, as well as, gee, is it 30%, which the old study said that were out-of-state drivers, and we've got 40 now in the new study. So which is it? So I'm a firm believer in correct information so that I can make a better decision. And when it's so convoluted or so mixed the way it is right now, it just makes it more difficult for any of us to make the right decision. So the other thing too is we have this informational hearing, and it's going to be deemed approved after that informational hearing. I think we owe it to our constituents to have a public hearing, for them to chime in and the opportunity to voice what they want or what they have to say, and then maybe take some of those comments to heart. And maybe it'll make the plan better if we allow them to provide some comments. But the way that this is written right now is we're going to make the plan, and then we're going to have this informational hearing, regardless if they have input or not, and then we're going to take the plan and we're going to go to the feds and come up with an agreement. I just don't think that's right. I think we should tell the public what the plan is, give them an opportunity to voice what they have to say. Another factor in this is the reciprocity agreement that we are going to enter into or plan to enter into. And I've read just most recently about those that, we saw Massachusetts, how much monies Connecticut operators owe them, but it's throughout the country, or those that are tolling, they have the same issue. So I guess it's a question maybe is, when should we get into an agreement with our fellow New England states? Do those that owe back money to Massachusetts, are we going to write this in such a way that it's only the agreement and the fines and penalties, or the paying the fee for tolling, it goes forward, and the reciprocity agreement will only start from that date of that agreement and not go retroactively go back in time, because it could be extremely costly to those that have not paid fines. And if we're going to hold up their registration here at this end, I think we may be creating a lot of turmoil. And I'm just going to just maybe ask the project list that we have in front of us here. Do those have to be shovel ready in order for the plan to be submitted? Do permits have to be in place? Is there an existing timeline? I guess that's a question.
Thank you, Senator. So I believe you got 2 questions on the table, is that correct?
I got 4 questions, 5 questions. But I guess these projects that are here in this bill, we talked about the viaduct, the Waterbury Mix Master, and you got a handful of other ones here. But do they have to be shovel ready? Do the permitting needs to be in place? Does zoning have to be addressed? Does do we have money in place for these projects? Again, maybe it's a rhetorical question. But, again, this details are not specific.
Right. The project list is quite lengthy. These are all items that must be addressed at some point in time. So those that are able to be addressed with current funding, they are, for all intensive purposes, shovel ready, or whatever that may mean for, being able to go. For items that are not yet ready, that's all part of the design, build, putting on the project list, and obtaining the funding so that they can move forward in that direction. Until such time that funding or stream is available, they could not move forward. But under this premise, with tolling revenues coming in, going into a dedicated fund with revenues building up, there would be, from what I infer with the monies coming in and over time, there will be enough sitting in the account for them to start choosing which project needs to happen, for them to make it shovel ready. They will have the funds necessary to move in those steps and get all the necessary permits. But at the moment, if we don't have the funds and it's not a project that is underway, then the project will not be underway.
Going back to the reciprocity, are we going to be protecting those that owe money and are fined and owe interest and penalties?
That potentially could be part of the negotiation with reciprocity between states, but just to be clear, you're suggesting we protect someone who has gone on a tolled road, has not paid their fair share, has fees and fines, and now we're going to protect them, which is part of the reason why we're even considering tolling in the first place, for having people that are using and damaging our roadways to contribute towards the cost and maintenance of that. Where I think, and we could, through negotiations with the neighboring states, do just that, go prospectively, but at the same time, it may hinder our ability to get reciprocity if they need their revenues from any person out of state that has not paid what they should have paid for using that tolled road, especially if they had other options not to do so. So whether that is going to happen, I guess, remains to be seen as we go forward. Again, that's another issue that we can discuss to see if that's a policy we want to go after. So if we're able to protect Connecticut residents, great. But at the same time, you want to protect Connecticut residents when they're following the rules of the road.
Is that agreement part of the submittal to the federal government when we get into an agreement with them?
That would have to be fleshed out because you need reciprocity agreements between neighboring states.
Okay. I just have one other comment and a question. So given the fact that the governor's budget called for the, I guess, the freezing of the automobiles dealer tax, and it's going to be retained in the general fund instead of placing it in the STF, and then also he removes the part of the prioritizing progress plan of the 250 million in GO bonds as well. So he's eliminated that. And given the fact that the projections for the toll implementation do not include revenue until actually 2024, I think the earliest, and that's been confirmed. I know the report and the information that I've seen on the Finance Revenue Bonding Committee starts it at 2022, I believe, and 2023, where we see a full implementation of tolls being up, but it's confirmed that this will not take place until 2024 and 2025. So in the meantime, if with all these funds being frozen and the GO aspect of it also not on the table, he's also got the diet of $965 million as well. So how are we going to fund current needs and infrastructure costs with all those funds out of play? Because we're talking 5 years now.
Yes, so you're touching on different aspects of the whole picture of the budget. So to be clear, the current bonding for transportation comes through STF, which are Special Transportation Fund revenue bonds to pay for transportation, and that's where the bonding has come for transportation going forward. The governor's proposal to take back the new car sales tax revenue and put it back into the general fund is his proposal to balance the budget. The legislature, in passing it last year, wrote it in a way that was not to be the case, but the governor's trying to balance the budget as he sees fit with his administration, which, as most people know, this is only the starting point of budget negotiations. So our legislature still has to weigh in, especially with all the comments that are going through the multiple committees on all the different proposals. So it's not clear what the ultimate solution may be there. So that still has to be flushed out where everyone get to weigh in. In terms of the general obligation bonds, and you mentioned the debt diet is to reduce our borrowing costs, which is something many people in this room have been advocating for years and years. It's been mentioned that we borrowed too much from some members. Here's an idea where, along with the governor, that he wants to reduce the level of bonding. Very clearly, the prioritized progress proposal is to use all transportation priority and funding to go into general obligation bonds, not into the STF revenue bonds. So that's an idea that we have to discuss, right? The GO bonds, and that also crowds out all the other general obligation bonds that the state has to deal with, such as general obligation bonds that fund economic development, higher education, housing, school construction. All those GO bonds to the level that we currently fund would be crowded out to some level or to some degree if we go with the other proposal. And that's something that we have to flesh out. So yes, there are constraints on general obligation bonds, but we do need to figure out the best course of action.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I won't, this is debatable regarding, and we can talk about this perhaps later on, but the diet is specifically is regarding GO bonds, and he's reduced it from $2 million or $2 billion that we have placed in statute, and we've put a cap on that, and that was a bipartisan agreement, and actually that cap or that bonding used to be as high as $2.7 billion, and we reduced it down to $2 billion in the bipartisan budget. Further, the making sure that we bond for our schools and the clean water grant and UConn, LoCEP, providing for all that. I think if we use his $965 million, he's given all those programs a major cut, major cut. Now, with that said, yes, I agree that the STO is the source that we have been using for upkeeping and making sure that part of our infrastructure is taken care of. And that would continue regarding this plan that is in front of us. But also, don't forget, we also received grant money from the federal government to the tune of about $735 million a year. So we got 1.5, but the needs from the DOT are 200. And we plugged a hole last year, or in the previous budget. We plugged it up with the car dealer tax to like 356 million, I think. And then we also gave them additional funding through the GO bonds of 250. Now the governor wants to take that all away in his budget. So my question is, so the DOT has been crying for years, or stating for years, that they don't have enough money to take care of the roads. So if the budget goes through, and we are going to be short money for our department to take care of the current infrastructure that we have. That's all I'm saying. I'm just wondering if you know how it's going to be plugged up, you know.
Well, I think you're articulating our frustration. There's not enough revenues to pay for all the things that DOT needs to do, or in the budget in the whole. The governor's debt diet is to say he is not going to release as much bonding in the past. So that's there is an authorization. What the legislature says is available for bonding. It's up to the governor to then actually release that bonding. And the previous governor stayed within that limit, but there was concerns on that some members felt that it was still too much. That's the reason for the debt diet. So it's a concerted effort to not release as much, even though he has the authority to do so. The hole that you mentioned, how are we going to do this, is the question of the day. One of the proposals is to find this new dedicated revenue stream. And that would alleviate the transportation aspects of all the things that the state needs to do. Again, since it's not GO bonds, it would not crowd out the other issues, but that doesn't mean those other issues don't have to be addressed. And that's part of the process, because the governor presented his version. The legislature, through the appropriations and finance committees, then can come up with adjustments to that budget as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Sure.